There's a sound you hear when ice begins to crack beneath your feet. It's subtle at first, a distant creaking, a faint groan from deep below. Most people ignore it. They keep skating, keep moving, keep pretending the surface is solid, until suddenly, catastrophically, it isn't. We're hearing that sound right now. The ice of global capitalism is cracking. And I'm not talking about some future apocalypse or distant theoretical collapse. I'm talking about cracks that are visible, measurable, undeniable if you're willing to look. But here's the extraordinary thing. Almost no one with power wants to admit it. Not the central bankers, not the corporate executives, not the politicians or the economists who advise them. They can hear the creaking, they can see the fissures spreading across the surface, but they cannot bring themselves to say out loud what they know to be true. Why? Because the moment they admit the system is cracking, the game is over. Their authority evaporates. Their carefully constructed narratives collapse. The entire edifice of legitimacy that sustains their power begins to crumble as surely as the ice beneath our feet. I spent my career studying capitalism, not as a cheerleader or a mindless critic, but as someone trying to understand how our economic system actually works. And I spent time in the rooms where decisions are made. As Greece's finance minister, I negotiated with the most powerful financial institutions on the planet. I saw up close how they think, what they fear, what they'll do to maintain control. And I can tell you with absolute certainty, they know the system is breaking. But they're paralyzed by fear and ideology, unable to imagine an alternative that doesn't threaten their position at the apex of a very unstable pyramid. Today, I want to make the cracks visible. I want to show you what they're desperate to hide. Because once you see these fractures, once you understand their causes and their trajectory, you cannot unsee them. And once enough of us see clearly, we can finally have an honest conversation about what comes next. The ice is cracking. The question is, will we acknowledge reality and build something better, or will we keep skating until we all fall through together? Let me start with the most fundamental crack, the one that undermines capitalism's entire social contract, the complete divorce between productivity and prosperity. For most of capitalism's history, there was a deal implicit but real. Work hard, increase your productivity, create more value, and you'll share in the wealth you generate. Your wages will rise with your output. You'll be able to afford a home, educate your children, retire with dignity. This was the promise of the post-war era, roughly 1945 to the mid-1970s. And for those 3 decades, it actually worked. Productivity and wages rose together. A factory worker in Detroit could buy a house, own a car, send kids to college. A teacher in Manchester could take a vacation. A clerk in Paris could save for retirement. This wasn't utopia. There were plenty of problems, plenty of exclusions, but the basic deal held. Then something changed. Around 1973, 1975, the lines diverged. Productivity kept rising. In fact, it accelerated dramatically with the computer revolution, the internet, artificial intelligence. We're more productive now than at any point in human history. We create more value per hour worked than ever before. But wages, they flatlined, they stagnated. In many cases, when you account for the skyrocketing costs of housing, healthcare, and education, real wages have actually declined. Think about what this means. We live in the richest, most productive era in human history, and yet the average worker can afford less than their parents could. Young people today cannot imagine owning homes in the cities where they work. Parents cannot afford childcare. Retirement seems like a fantasy. Where did all that wealth go? You know the answer. It went up to the top 1%, to the top 0.1%, to shareholders and executives and people who own capital rather than work for wages. This isn't happening by accident. It's not the result of natural economic laws. It's the result of deliberate policy choices made over 40 years, the destruction of unions, the deregulation of finance, the prioritization of shareholder value over all else, the transformation of corporations from social institutions into pure profit extraction machines. And here's why this is a crack, and not just inequality, because it breaks capitalism's own legitimacy. Capitalism's moral justification has always been that it rewards effort and innovation, that it creates prosperity, that however unequally, eventually lifts everyone. When that stops being true, when working hard means falling behind, the entire ideological foundation crumbles. People can see this. They feel it in their bones. They work harder than their parents did. They're more educated, more productive, and they can't afford the lives their parents took for granted. This isn't a mystery. This is the system working exactly as it's been redesigned to work, to enrich the few at the expense of the many. And this crack is widening every year. The second crack is intimately related to the first, the financialization of everything. When I was young, capitalism was about making things, cars, refrigerators, houses, real goods and services that real people needed. Finance existed to serve this productive economy. Banks lent money to businesses, to invest in machinery, to home buyers, to purchase houses, to students, to get education. Finance was the servant. Production was the master. Today, that relationship has completely reversed. Finance doesn't serve the productive economy anymore. It has replaced it. It has become the economy. Look at the numbers. In 1950, the financial sector accounted for about 2.5% of GDP in the United States. Today, it's over 8%. Financial sector profits were about 10% of all corporate profits in 1980. By 2005, they were 40%. 40% of all profits going to an industry that produces nothing tangible, nothing you can eat or live in or use. How do they make this money? Not by lending to small businesses or funding innovation. That's too risky, too slow, too much work. Instead, they make money by trading with each other. They create fantastically complex financial instruments, derivatives worth trillions of dollars, which are essentially bets on bets on bets. They engage in high-frequency trading, where algorithms make millions of trades per second, skimming tiny profits from each transaction. It's a casino, but unlike a regular casino, when the house loses, you bail it out with your tax money. Remember 2008? The banks had spent years creating toxic assets, bundling bad mortgages into securities, lying about their quality, betting against their own clients. The whole edifice came crashing down. Millions lost their homes. Millions lost their jobs. Entire countries, Ireland, Spain, Greece, were brought to their knees. And what happened to the bankers? They got bailouts, trillions of dollars in public money to rescue institutions that had gambled recklessly and lost. Meanwhile, ordinary people were told to tighten their belts, accept austerity, make sacrifices. Not a single major banker went to jail. Not one. Instead, they got bonuses. This is what I mean by financialization. The financial sector has metastasized from a useful part of the economy into a cancerous growth that extracts wealth from the productive economy while contributing nothing of value. It's become a machine for transferring money from the pockets of workers and taxpayers into the accounts of financiers. And here's the crack: this is unsustainable. An economy cannot survive when its financial sector is purely extractive, when it produces nothing but takes everything. Eventually, there's nothing left to extract. The host dies. We're watching this happen in real time. Private equity firms buy up companies, load them with debt, extract all the value, and leave them as empty shells. Hedge funds buy up houses, driving up prices so ordinary people can't afford homes. Financial engineering has replaced actual engineering. This crack runs deep because finance now controls politics. Wall Street funds campaigns. Banking executives rotate through government positions. The Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank, they're run by people from the financial sector, for the financial sector. And they will defend this system to the death, even as it kills the productive economy they claim to serve. The third crack is the most existential, and it terrifies me more than any economic crisis: capitalism's complete structural inability to address climate collapse. Let me be absolutely clear. Climate change is not a future problem. It's not something your grandchildren will worry about. It's happening now, this year, today. Record heat waves are killing thousands. Floods are displacing millions. Droughts are destroying crops. Wildfires are consuming entire regions. Oceans are rising. Ecosystems are collapsing. This is the new normal, and it's accelerating faster than even the most pessimistic scientists predicted. Now, the defenders of capitalism will tell you the market can solve this. Green technology, carbon trading, innovation. Let entrepreneurs work their magic, and we'll solve climate change while making money. This is delusional fantasy. Dangerous, deadly 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 fantasy. Dafir while making money. This is delusional fantasy. Dangerous, deadly 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 fantasy. Dangerous, deadly. Capitalism is structurally incapable of addressing climate change. And here's why. Capitalism's only logic is growth. Endless growth. Infinite growth. Every company must grow or die. Every quarter must show higher profits than the last. Every year must see more production, more consumption, more extraction. But we live on a finite planet. You cannot have infinite growth on a finite planet. These two facts are incompatible. One of them has to give. Climate action requires leaving resources in the ground. It requires not drilling for oil, not mining for coal, not cutting down forests. It requires producing less, consuming less, growing less. It requires, in short, doing the one thing capitalism absolutely cannot do, voluntarily limiting growth. That's why fossil fuel companies have known about climate change since the 1970s and spent billions covering it up, funding denial, blocking action. That's why every climate summit ends with empty promises and rising emissions. That's why governments subsidize fossil fuels with trillions of dollars while renewable energy struggles for scraps. The crack here is profound. Capitalism requires perpetual growth to survive, but perpetual growth is killing the planet. We're running out of time to choose between capitalism and habitability, and the people with power are choosing capitalism. I've watched this up close. As finance minister, I proposed green investment programs that would have created jobs while addressing climate change. I was told they weren't financially viable. Meanwhile, billions were available for bank bailouts. The market won't save us because the market is what's killing us. The invisible hand is invisible because it doesn't exist. What exists is the visible fist of fossil fuel corporations and the politicians they've purchased, beating down anyone who threatens their profits. And while we debate carbon taxes and green bonds, the planet burns, the crack widens, and we pretend we can solve an existential crisis with the same system that created it. Here's the fourth crack, and it's perhaps the most insidious because it prevents us from addressing all the others, the hollowing out of democracy itself. We tell ourselves we live in democracies. We vote, don't we? We have elections, parliaments, constitutions, all the trappings of democratic governance. But let me ask you something. When did you last vote on anything that actually mattered? Did you vote on whether to bail out the banks in 2008? No. Unelected officials decided to transfer trillions from taxpayers to financial institutions. Did you vote on the trade agreements that shipped your jobs overseas? No. They were negotiated in secret by technocrats and corporate lobbyists. Did you vote on whether your central bank should prioritize fighting inflation over fighting unemployment? No. Central banks are deliberately insulated from democratic control. Did you vote on whether tech companies should be allowed to harvest and monetize your personal data? No. That just happened while regulators looked the other way. The real decisions, the ones that shape your life, your work, your future, are made by institutions that are not democratically accountable. Central banks, international organizations like the IMF and World Bank, corporate boardrooms, unelected bodies like the European Commission. I call this the post-democratic era. We maintain the theater of democracy, the elections, the campaigns, the debates, but the substance has been hollowed out. Real power lies elsewhere, in places you cannot vote for, cannot touch, cannot hold accountable. And this is deliberate. It's not an accident or an unfortunate side effect. It's a feature, not a bug. I saw this explicitly when I was finance minister. I would negotiate with officials from the European Central Bank, the IMF, the European Commission. They would make demands, cut pensions, fire public workers, privatize assets. I would say, I can't do that. I was elected on a mandate to oppose these policies, and they would look at me with genuine puzzlement and say, elections cannot be allowed to change economic policy. Let that sink in. Elections cannot be allowed to change economic policy. Democracy cannot be permitted to interfere with the dictates of capital. This is the crack at the heart of our political system. Democracy has been reduced to choosing which politicians will implement policies they didn't choose and cannot change. You can vote for whoever you want, but the neoliberal economic program continues regardless. And people feel this. They feel powerless. They feel like voting doesn't matter. And they're not wrong. This is why populism is rising on both left and right. This is why trust in institutions is collapsing. People know, even if they can't articulate it precisely, that democracy has been gutted. Without real democracy, we cannot challenge the other cracks. We cannot force corporations to pay living wages. We cannot regulate finance. We cannot make the investments needed to address climate change. We're trapped in a system that serves capital, and we're not allowed to vote our way out. The fifth crack is the debt trap that's ensnaring individuals, businesses, and nations alike. This is about how capitalism now sustains itself, not through rising wages and expanding prosperity, but through expanding debt. Think about what's happened over the past 40 years. Real wages stagnated, as I mentioned, but consumer spending needed to continue. That's how capitalism works. It needs constant consumption. So how do you maintain consumption when wages aren't rising? Debt. You give people credit cards, you give them student loans, you give them mortgages they can barely afford. You tell them this is normal, this is how you participate in the economy, this is how you get ahead. The result? Household debt has exploded. Student debt in the United States alone exceeds $1.7 trillion. An entire generation is starting their working lives deep in debt, paying interest to banks instead of saving for homes or retirement. And it's not just individuals. Corporations have gorged on cheap debt, not to invest in productive capacity, but to buy back their own shares, inflating stock prices and enriching executives and shareholders. Corporate debt is at record highs. Nations too are trapped. Developing countries borrow from international institutions, then find themselves forced to implement policies that benefit creditors rather than citizens. And even wealthy nations like Japan, the United States, and most of Europe are carrying debt levels that would have been considered catastrophic a generation ago. Here's the crack. This debt is unsustainable. It can't be paid back. Not really. Instead, it's rolled over, refinanced, expanded. We're in a situation where the only thing preventing collapse is the willingness of everyone to keep pretending the debt can be serviced forever. And who benefits from this? The financial sector. Banks make profits from interest payments. Creditors have power over debtors. Debt becomes a tool of control, a mechanism for extracting wealth from the bottom and middle and transferring it upward. I saw this devastatingly in Greece. We were trapped in debt we couldn't pay. Instead of acknowledging this and restructuring the debt, creditors forced us to borrow more to pay back old loans and then imposed conditions that made it impossible for our economy to grow enough to service the debt. It was a deliberate trap designed to extract as much as possible while maintaining control. This is happening globally now. Debt has become the way capitalism maintains itself despite its contradictions. Can't afford housing on your wages, take a mortgage. Can't afford education, take a loan. Can't afford healthcare, put it on credit. Can't afford to retire, keep working until you die. The system runs on debt because it can no longer run on rising prosperity. And that's a crack that cannot hold forever. So we have all these cracks. Productivity divorced from prosperity, financialization, climate crisis, democratic deficit, unsustainable debt. They're visible, they're growing, they're undeniable. So why doesn't everyone see them? Why do people keep believing in a system that's so obviously fracturing? Because there's a massive machinery of denial working to keep you confused, divided, and passive. First, narrative control. The media is owned by billionaires and corporations who benefit from the current system. They'll report on individual problems, a corrupt politician here, a bad company there, but they'll never question the system itself. They'll never connect the dots. They'll never tell you that these aren't separate issues, but symptoms of structural failure. Instead, they'll give you endless debates about trivia. They'll turn politics into entertainment. They'll focus on personalities rather than policies, on scandals rather than systems. This keeps you engaged, but never informed about what actually matters. Second, division. They need you fighting each other, so you don't unite against them. Native-born versus immigrant. Urban versus rural. young versus old, one generation versus another, men versus women. This identity politics, which can address real injustices, is also weaponized to prevent class solidarity. As long as workers in different countries see each other as competitors or threats, they won't recognize their common interests against capital. As long as we're arguing about culture war issues, we're not organizing to challenge economic power. Third, false solutions. They'll sell you individual answers to systemic problems. Can't afford a house, work harder, get a side hustle, worried about climate change, buy eco-friendly products, recycle more. Concerned about inequality, invest in cryptocurrency, trust the blockchain. Every systemic problem is reframed as individual responsibility. The system is fine, they tell you. If you're struggling, it's your fault. Work harder, be smarter, be more entrepreneurial. This keeps you blaming yourself instead of organizing to change the system. Fourth, the weaponization of hope. They tell you things are getting better. Technology will solve our problems. The next election will fix things. Just be patient, trust the process. Wait for the market to work its magic. This keeps you passive while the cracks keep spreading. By the time you realize nothing is getting better, it may be too late. I've watched this machinery operate up close. I've seen how journalists get pressured not to ask uncomfortable questions. I've seen how economists who challenge orthodoxy get marginalized. I've seen how politicians who propose real change get destroyed by media and money. The system defends itself, and its first line of defense is making sure you don't see the cracks clearly enough to demand change. So what happens when the ice finally breaks? When these cracks widen enough that denial is no longer possible? History gives us some clues, and frankly, they're not comforting. When capitalism faced its last great crisis, the Great Depression of the 1930s, the world split three ways. Some countries went fascist, some went communist, some, like the United States and Britain, found a middle path, social democracy, the New Deal, the welfare state. We're at a similar moment now. The cracks are widening. The system is failing for most people, and we're seeing similar splits emerging. Fascism is rising again, though we don't always call it that. Authoritarian populists are gaining power across the world, offering simple answers to complex problems, scapegoating minorities, promising to restore a mythical past. This is capitalism's traditional escape valve. When the system starts failing, redirect anger downward and outward rather than upward. On the other side, there's growing interest in alternatives, democratic socialism, cooperatives, degrowth, Green New Deals. Young people especially are questioning whether capitalism is compatible with a livable future. And in the middle, there's the desperate attempt to maintain the current system through increasingly authoritarian means, more surveillance, more police, more control, all while pretending everything is fine. I don't know which path we'll take, but I know this. Doing nothing is not an option. The ice is cracking. We will go somewhere. The question is whether we choose our destination or let it be chosen for us by crisis and chaos. Let me bring this home. Global capitalism is cracking. This is not speculation or prophecy. It's observable reality. Productivity is divorced from prosperity. Finance has metastasized into a destructive force. Climate catastrophe accelerates while we debate market solutions. Democracy has been hollowed out. Debt traps individuals and nations alike. And the machinery of denial works overtime to keep you from seeing clearly. These cracks will widen. The system will break. The only question is what we build in its place. The people in power cannot lead us through this transition because they cannot imagine a world where they're not in power. They'll cling to the existing system until it collapses catastrophically, taking millions down with it. So it's up to us, the people who can see the cracks, the people who refuse the denial, the people who understand that another world is not just possible but necessary. We need to do several things simultaneously. First, name reality. Stop pretending the system is fine. Stop accepting their narratives. Speak the truth about what's actually happening, even when it's uncomfortable. Second, build alternatives now. Create cooperatives, mutual aid networks, local democratic institutions that prefigure the world we want. Don't wait for permission from the crumbling system. Third, organize. Everything good that workers have ever won. Weekends, 8-hour days, healthcare, pensions, came through organization and struggle, not from the generosity of the powerful. Fourth, connect across borders. Capital is global. Our resistance must be global too. Workers in one country are not your enemies. They're your allies against a system that exploits all of us. And finally, don't lose hope. Yes, the system is cracking, but that's not cause for despair, it's cause for action. Every crack is an opportunity to imagine and build something better. The choice before us is simple but stark. We can acknowledge that capitalism is cracking and actively shape what comes next, or we can remain in denial until the ice breaks beneath us and we all fall through together. I know which path I choose. The question is, what will you choose? Thank you.